Coogs House. All right. The adjustments to the Big 12 has been difficult to say the least for the football program, but I think it means, especially with it being a bye week, that it's time to talk about someone's going to have a little bit easier time adjusting, we think.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater who can't step by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That we can lay us on Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. And welcome back to the YouTube channel. That's where you found us, because it is so good to see you again and so good to see you to talk some hoops. Remember, doing a giveaway every 250 subscribers. The next one of those is at 1750. So hit subscribe, get us there, like and comment on the video, so let us know what you think. Now, if you're a Coug fan, but like basketball's not really your jam, hint, hint, tell us what kind of jelly, a strawberry, a grape, a blackberry, jelly, jam, preserves. What do you put on your PB and J? Now, we got some guests coming on from the Zone Star State podcast, Zone Star State. That's hard to say 3 times fast. Zone Star State podcast from Dave Campbells to preview all things Houston Cougar basketball. It's a fun conversation split into 2 parts. So let's jump into today's Houston Cougar basketball talk. And we are joined by Matthew and Ishmael of the Zone Star State podcast. Fun play on words there, but with the Dave Campbell's Basketball Network. Before we get too far, Matthew and then Ishmael, how y'all doing tonight?
Doing great.
No, I'm doing really good, man. We actually we talked to Nikki Collin this morning from Baylor, one of the coaches that we've tried to get on, hadn't been successful until this morning. So we are actually really happy about that.
Yeah,
that's big. Getting coaches on is a big deal, and then it's fun because I'm assuming you're previewing basketball season. We're all previewing basketball these days, and that means it's around the corner, right? That's a fun time of the year. Zone Star State podcast. Y'all have been with Dave Campbell's basketball for a minute now. Ishmael, we'll start with you. Talk me through what is Dave Campbell's basketball. I remember, and this is a quick side note, I played everything in high school football, like being listed on your schools, like Dave Campbell's football, like they list every high school in the back. That was like a big, I remember like a junior, like, oh my God, my name is, like that was a big deal, right? Basketball is something I don't think people realize and associate with the brand that like everyone knows Dave Campbell's in Texas, but I don't know that everyone's associated with the basketball. So talk us through, what is the basketball page? What do y'all do?
Yeah, so for the people that don't know, we're owned by the McLeans, which McLean's out of Baylor, McLean Stadium, things like that. We're the only media company that they own. Well, when they took over, I believe in 2015, before I started working there, I joined in 2017. They kind of were like, well, we kind of want to start a basketball magazine, which made sense, right? The state has tons of basketball, obviously with Baylor, both men's and women's, but in the high school ranks as well. And so it originally started with R.V. Bogus, who was a former high school basketball magazine editor. He covered the high school side, and David Barron did the college side, and they worked together to put out the magazine, which started in 2015. I was brought in. I helped one issue my first year, and then I kind of took it over. Me and RV combined to work on the next issues. And basically my goal was to get it to, if not the level of football, they had a 60-year head start, but at least like make it look more like football, right? Like, cause if you look at the issues just from a couple years ago, it's a lot of like just kind of photos, or not really photos, just kind of text, and just it's kind of put together. And my goal was to get it looking similar to football, but also different in so many ways. My boss gave me free reign to like, hey, look, we don't have a legacy tied to this, so you can kind of do what you want to see what works. And so that's basically what I've done. If you look at the coverage, you can kind of tell when I start taking over, because I start, wanting to do photo shoots. It was originally like stock photos and like, Photoshopped things. I started to do photo shoots, and I kind of make that my goal to kind of make it look modern. I'm a big Slam magazine fan, so I kind of want to have that kind of feel.
So
And
I don't mean to
yeah,
interrupt.
go ahead.
Slam
No, go ahead.
magazine last year, the Scarface quote with the Houston on the front, like that. That's all coming together.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So I'm glad you picked up on that because when I decided Houston was going to be the cover last year, I looked up Scarface, I looked up Bun B, and I looked up who was the other one? I think it was Ghetto Boys. I looked just like
Yeah.
which album could work here. And I went to our graphic designer. I was like, "Hey, here's 3 albums. Can you figure out which one works better with the font?" And he ended up giving me the Scarface to fix, which I was really, really, really happy with. But then before, I believe it was 2020, Brune was still in school. I think it was
No, I just graduated and
Yes, that's
COVID
right.
hit, and I was broke looking for a job, and I
And
said, "Ish, please."
So he emailed me. Well, technically, he emailed me in the summer
Yeah,
because you were like, "Hey, do you have anything open?" And at the time, no, it was only like me, Pickle, Shahan, and Tepper were the only, and then Will Wilkerson. And so I was like, no, but I have these freelance opportunities. He ended up doing I think the Conference USA previews for the magazine.
yeah.
Yeah. And so I was like, hey, I will stay in contact if something comes up. Winter came around, and I was like, I got no content really for the basketball website. And so I was like, do you want to work part-time and start a podcast? And it kind of started from there. And, we kind of, I don't know about you, Matthew. I never asked you, but like I didn't know exactly what it would come to. Like I was like, sure, we don't have a basketball podcast. We'll just figure it out. And like, even as the editor of this magazine, I don't think I even expected to be this in depth as far as like coverage of the state and like top to bottom. I don't know. I kind of pride myself on the fact that I can talk about Alicia Westbrook from Texas A&M Corpus Christi, it's really weird. But even as the editor, I didn't expect myself to get this in the weeds as we've gotten on the show.
Yeah,
Matthew, I got a lot of questions. Louisiana guy, but
no,
I'm
from San Antonio.
He's from Texas.
Okay, because I would never guess in listening to you, etc., that you had like the living in Baton Rouge thing. I would have never been like, wait, this guy knows way too much about Texas for a guy. Like Texans love Texas, but I was like, whoa, wait a second.
That would be random. Yeah. I'm from San Antonio. I went to school up at North Texas. Like I said, when COVID hit, I was looking for a job, and then I was interning with CBS and 24/7 Sports, and so then I got the LSU job out here. So I've been here for this is the start of year 3, so 2 years now. And so we just kept it going. Yeah, like you just said, like when we started it, I mean, I was literally, during COVID, I was just trying to make it, and so we started this podcast, and I was like, let's just go in on it. And so it's literally men's and women's now it's 25 teams, so 50 teams.
Yeah. So originally it was called Texas 24. Which was Brune's idea, and it was a great idea, and we ran with that for a year or two, and then Commerce decided to go up to D1, and it was like, Division 1. Yeah. It was like, all right, do we want to keep numbering this, or should we change it up a little bit? So we kind of went to Zone Star State.
Yeah. Zone Star State's fun. Now I'm on Bomani Jones's team about zone being for cowards and all that, but Zone Star State.
Hey, look, yeah, I'm also there with you.
Yeah, nobody, and it was funny when we did. It was like we had some of the top defense teams in the country. Houston, obviously, Baylor, North Texas, Texas Tech, and none of them really played zone. But it sounds great, so we're going with it.
No, it's a clever name. It's clever. In Houston specifically, we heard Ishmael talk some about like the cover photo and all that with Houston last year. Matthew, what's your take on the Houston program? You mentioned defense, and it's not a zone defense, but it's a defense people know and love. When you hear Houston basketball, Matthew, what are you thinking of first?
Jeez. Oh man, yeah, I'm thinking of toughness. That's the first thing I think of is the rock fights, all the defensive battles we've seen over the past few years, obviously with Kelvin Sampson as the head coach. And I don't go back too much further than that. I can't go back and name the 2010 team by heart or anything like that. But just in recent years, I think of toughness. And then you think of them having 1, maybe 2 elite guards that, Quentin Grimes, DeMarcus Sassers, and so on and so forth.
Ishmael, same question. You hear Houston basketball, aside from Scarface, what are you thinking?
I mean, honestly, it's similar to Matthew, but I think of it's not always going to be the cleanest game, but it's going to make somebody work. I think it really stood out that year they made the Final Four. with that Quentin Grimes team. It wasn't exactly the prettiest offense to watch, but one, they were going to beat you on the offensive boards, and you were gonna shoot like 32% no matter what, right?
Yeah.
And so I think when we were watching, I think that was the year, that tournament specifically was the year where I really started to pay attention to like their style of play. It never really stood out to me until then, where it was like, oh man, their offense is just putting up shots to get the offensive board. Like that's when it stood out to me. And it was like, again, it was like Quentin Grimes going to put up a shot and they may get it, but they may not, but they're going to get the offensive board and they're going to get the putback. And so it's like, okay, that's kind of what they like to do. So that it's always like, it's not always going to be the prettiest. Sometimes it is. Sometimes they do just have a good offense. But that year in particular was the year where I was like, what are they doing on offense? Oh, they can just beat anybody on the glass. It doesn't matter.
All right, now I understand that Houston is building a team that is ready to win the Big 12 and those kinds of things. And the roster construction is fun. It's fun to hear about where things are going. But first, if you have the same kind of passion, drive, and patience, what else could you bring home besides a winning trophy that keeps your ride alive? That's something from eBay Motors. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers to roof racks to exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Motors Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride or die every time, your money back. That's your ride or die every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive and healthy at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusion apply. eBay Guarantee Fit only available to U.S. customers.
Yeah, that was our first year doing the podcast. We didn't start until March of that year, so that was our first year.
Good timing.
It was
Baylor, Houston. Yeah, so our first run of it was Baylor, Houston, the Final Four, and then Baylor winning it. And then I think of the 2022 season a lot because of how decimated that Houston team was, and it was like winning games 50-45 in the tournament.
Yeah.
And then losing to Villanova, and scoring 44 points. But it's like, that was kind of a run that was like, I didn't think they would even make it out of the second round, and then they're here in the Elite Eight.
Well, with that year, Marcus going down so early, I think being an American Athletic Conference team, there's some thought that just making the tournament was going to be hard that year, right?
Sure.
It's a very prescient start, though. If you started the podcast about state of Texas basketball the year before, you had Houston versus Baylor in the Final Four.
Exactly.
Baylor really was crazy.
Baylor winning it for the first time, a Texas team since whatever it was, 76 or something. I don't know, but it was.
It just happened to be it. I don't know. It was like lightning in a bottle because again, it was obviously Baylor was what they were, but it's not like we headed into the year with like, oh yeah, and then X, Y, and Z are going to be right behind them. It was more like Baylor and then everybody else, and then since we started the podcast, really, like obviously Texas hired Chris Beard. Obviously, we know how that turned out, but like they were rising back to prominence, and like Tech kind of had their moment here and there, and we're seeing North Texas won the NIT. So it's like we kind of started it at this weird time where like everybody just started to rise.
Definitely. Well, and the tournament the year before, I didn't pay as much attention to Baylor the year before, but Houston was kind of having a pretty strong year the year before, honestly, when there was no tournament. And so, that's interesting to see how those kinds of things go. The Sampson years have been pretty strong, obviously. You mentioned Baylor, though, and I don't maybe it's the part of me that wants to stop talking about that loss because that was kind of an embarrassing one. But the Baylor-Houston connection continues this year with L.J. Cryer transferring from Baylor to Houston, coming home, right? A Houston kid coming home.
Yep.
He and then Damian Dunn's a big name transfer as well from the American Athletic Conference. A Temple guy, though, so probably doesn't pay, it might not be as pertinent to this conversation. LJ, introduce the folks at home to LJ Cryer that maybe didn't stay up till the middle of the night to watch the Australia scrimmages or didn't watch Baylor a lot last year. Who are we getting here?
Yeah, man. Speaking of COVID robbed potentially LJ Cryer of a historic state championship run, because him and Eddie Lampkin both were at Morton Ranch, and that was a very special team. Now, I wonder, I think before he committed to Houston, I was a little bit, not skeptical, but I was a little bit wary on like Houston's transfer strategy, because I said they lost Marcus Sasser and they got Damian Dunn, but I was like, okay, is that enough? Right? I was like, I know they bring back Jamal Shed, and I was like, it wasn't enough. And then they get Cryer. I mean, I think he plateaued a little bit at Baylor last year, compared to the year before when he looked like he was taking a real big step. I wonder, my thing is, I think he fits what this Houston team needs, and this Houston team hides what he is not good at, which is he's not a very good perimeter defender. But he's playing alongside probably the best perimeter defender in the state by far, in my opinion, and Jamal Shed. So I don't think that matters. And so I think what Houston needs after losing a Marcus Sasser is just a guy who's not afraid to shoot, who can play off ball, who can play with the ball. He's going to have free reign. I know we were talking to Matt Wilson from the Baylor pod, Between Two Bears. And he was like, he brought up the quote, because one of the quotes that was interesting was he mentioned like, yeah, I want to play point guard. And it's like, then he goes to Houston and it's like, we're not going to really play point guard. But it's like, it's like, that was a little bit of a interesting quote. But regardless, they're getting a guy who's not afraid to shoot the ball and who's going to be able to, his deficiencies, I think, are going to be hidden pretty well on this Houston team.
I mean, Matthew, same question to you. And what does he bring in? We mentioned shooting. I think shooting highlights all of his strengths. He's a crazy, brilliant shooter. What is he adding to Houston in a way that you're seeing? Is it just us shooting? What's going on there?
I think he's, in a way, a replacement for Marcus Sasser. But I think Ish pointed out well, it's kind of, he's going to have, I think, the freedom that we've seen guards at Houston have to take shots. And in the past, if they've been missed, they've been offensive rebounded. I'm interested to see how the front court shapes up for this Houston team. But for Sasser, I just think he's well-rounded enough. And at Baylor last year, it was like they had Keontae George, they had Adam Flagler. It didn't feel like there was really as much freedom, I think, that he wanted. And yeah, I'm sure he might not play point guard, but in general, I think the ball's going to be in his hand a lot more. We know about the shooting, we know about the scoring in general. But I'm interested to see what he looks like maybe as a playmaker in spurts, because like we said, we didn't really get to see that a ton. Baylor plays similar to Houston in some ways, but I think because of what Scott Drew has there, like their team construction is different. And so with LJ Cryer going to Houston, I think that it's just going to enable him to get more shots off the dribble, maybe get more second chance opportunities. I just think and like I said, I trust the defense around him to kind of make up for any deficiencies.
Matthew, you mentioned the defense around him, and Ishmael did too. What other names stick? Obviously, the national name would be Jamal Shed, I guess. What other names stick out as far as like when you're previewing this on y'all's podcast? I'm sure you'll hit Houston at some point. Like 1, 2, 3, like guys that people got to know when they're tuning into the Cougs, as you see it from like a more broad or statewide aspect.
I mean, Shed's one. Are we including Cryer here?
Sure.
Cryer's 2, and then Juwan Roberts, right? I think he's.
Yeah.
And I mentioned my questions of front court. It's not as much as like talent. It's more of this team. I think Juwan Roberts is going to have a lot more on his plate this year, maybe more than we've seen before. Javier Francis, I think, is a fine player. They have a couple of other options, but they're two guys over 6'8", are both, Cedric Lath, who's a redshirt freshman, and Jacob McFarland, who's a freshman. So it's the front court's going to be interesting. Those are the 3 names I would go with. Obviously, you can throw in, like, the backcourt is talented enough here. We're going to do a podcast on the top 10 backcourts in the state, and Houston will be very high, not just because of Jamal Shed and LJ Cryer, but like you said, Damian Dunn, Terrence Arsenault, Ramon Walker, Emmanuel Sharp, like, you can go down a list of these guards and be pretty impressed. So I think that's what I'm looking forward to seeing. But those are the 3 names I would say.
Ish, what are your 3?
I'm not going to pick Shed and Cryer. I'm going to go Emmanuel Sharp, because I think he really stood out in the tournament. I think when they were really struggling against Northern Kentucky, I think it was. He hit some big shots in that game.
It's hard to remember that they did actually struggle, but they did.
I was about to say, I do remember that game was like, oh, why do I have to watch this game? But Emmanuel Sharp is somebody who started to get more playing time towards the end of the year, and he has that. Again, they're not the best as a team. They're not the best shooting team as a whole, and just the more shooting options, I think he can become one of their better shooters potentially. I am curious if Terrence Arsenault gets more in the lineup. I saw him a lot at Beaumont United. I think he's very talented. He's a shot getter. I think he could fill in that Tremont Mark role of coming off the bench and just kind of filling it up a little bit. And I think I am going to stick with Juwan Roberts on that one, because every Houston team that we've seen so far, they may not be the most talented big man, the most gifted big man, but they have the guy who like everything revolves around him. He's not a defensive liability. He can rebound. He can put it on the floor a little bit, right? He's not exactly the most polished offensive player, but you can run some pick and roll with him. I always go back to who was the one during the Final Four run. I'm forgetting his name.
Chaney, who rest in peace. Reggie Chaney just passed away.
Rest in peace, Reggie Chaney. Yes. But they always have. He's a perfect example of that. They always have that rim running big who is a defensive stalwart, and just somebody who Kelvin Sampson knows, like, I can play this guy 20 to 30 minutes every single night. And with no Jarris Walker this year, they're going to need that. And so I think, by far, I'm curious what Tugler looks like as well. He's going to be, I think, somebody that coming in from the high school ranks that's going to be counted on. But I think Juwan Roberts is going to be clearly the guy. By the way, look, something on Juwan Roberts last year for the magazine. I asked for Sasser, and there was another player I requested, and Sampson was like, well, can we do Juwan Roberts instead? And so Juwan Roberts was on. So that's how Juwan Roberts ended up on the cover. I was like, yeah, sure, go for it. And so
Kelvin doesn't hear no a lot. Kelvin doesn't hear no, right? You mentioned Terrence Arsenault, Ishmael, and this question we go back and forth with both of you, but you mentioned they went to Beaumont United.
Yes.
They played an Australian tour this summer where they went and played a handful of professional teams over there. They got mollywobbed by the national team, and they played pretty well and competitively with and actually blew out a couple of the pro teams. And I think that speaks to a number of different things. But in those games, that was interesting. And yes, I have an infant, so I'm staying up till 3 a.m. to watch them. They had Terrence Arsenault playing some power forward. He's undersized. He's kind of tough and long. You saw him play some at Beaumont United, it sounds like. And it sounds more like that was his role in high school, but that's a hard transition to college. If they went small, could he be that forward? Would it have to be somebody else?
No, I think so. I think he could. He made it work in 5A because that's like the borderline of like you can pull off a 6'5", 4-man. That is interesting because I do wonder if that's Kelvin Sampson also maybe adjusting to maybe what life in the Big 12 is going to like. They're not going to necessarily be able to bully a lot of teams in the Big 12, right? And so I'm wondering if this is him maybe adjusting to where it's like, okay, if we have Juwan Roberts at the 5, and then we just kind of put shooters around him, right? If that's something to go. That's interesting because I think Houston has, like Brune mentioned, they have a lot of guards. And I wonder if this is his way of like, let me just put all my shot getters on the floors as much as possible. Because again, he's not the biggest guy. He has decent size. I like his size for a kind of a forward, not necessarily a power forward, but just a general wing. But I am curious about that. That's interesting. I didn't know about that because I think that is an interesting wrinkle that I'm wondering if Sampson kind of looks at the Big 12 and is like, all right, we're going to be playing. In the AAC, you can just kind of, unless you're playing Memphis, basically, you can just kind of like mollywop anybody.
They certainly did, like,
yeah. And so, and then in the Big 12, it's like, all right, we got to play Tech, we got to play Texas, all these teams. So that's something fascinating to watch that I didn't consider, to be honest.
Matthew, and it might not be Terrence, maybe it's Ramon Walker or somebody, but what do you think of the idea of running this lineup? You mentioned all the guards, Matthew. Would a 4-guard lineup be effective here, or are they going to be lacking in size and missing it?
I was ready. I do think from a size perspective, you're going against some big dudes in the Big 12. Obviously, we know, Hunter Dickinson now at Kansas. Texas has guys. Texas Tech had got some guys from the portal that are big. And I go back to, the team a few years ago that didn't really have a guy over 6'8", 6'9". I mean, you had the Fabian White, Gorham, Cheney team, but those guys were clearly forwards. Those guys were clearly rebounders and defenders and stuff like that. Terrence Arsenault is not really that mold, and obviously he's only played 1 year, so I'm not gonna say he can't get there, but I don't really want him to get there. He's a polished. He is a guy who can score the ball. He's a versatile wing. So playing him at the 4 is something I'm not sure how much we've really seen them do over the past 4 years or so. Because even when they were small, they were tough and gritty. And so that's big shoes for Terrence Arsenault to fill, of the guys that I just named. Can he be Fabian White? That's asking a lot. He can shoot, he can do that, but Fabian White was obviously great defensively, rebounding, all this stuff. That's a guy that was 6'7", 6'8", that was a monster. So it's a lot to ask.
All right, so we're going to put a pause in the conversation. That's a full episode worth of talk. That's a lot of fun to talk Cougar basketball. But we're bringing Ish and Matthew back tomorrow for the second half of our Houston Cougar basketball preview. We'll break down schedules, wins, losses, the Big 12, and even the impact all this confusing movement around. Not so confusing, I guess. All this movement around could happen. What is more confusing than that? And that is recruiting. So more on that tomorrow, continuing the Houston basketball preview. So make sure you subscribe. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. Locked on Cougs, the Prime Locked On Podcast Network. And that means your team every day. Go Cougs.